With the pistol pointed at my head, I tell him my name and that I have children and a wife at home. He commands me again to drop my rifle. I tell him, okay. As I begin to pull the sling over my head, I grab one of the grenades I'd been carrying on me and drop my AR to the ground, turn around with my fingers, ready to pull the pin. He's shocked to see what I'm holding. I tell him, you've got two choices now. Uncock your pistol and we can talk, or option 2, I pull the pin and we both die right now, right here, today. He begrudgingly uncocks his pistol and asks me what I'm doing in his house. I apologize for intruding and explain that I was reconning the neighborhood for supplies and allies. He angrily asked if I was one of the jackass thugs burning down houses and killing innocent people. I said, hell no, I'd never do that. He then tells me he saw me assassinate a man this morning standing by the downed Russian fighter jet. You saw that, huh? Well, Gerard was one of those thugs you're talking about. I stretched the truth to him, hoping it'd help me out. His body language was starting to become more relaxed, and I told him about Washington, D.C. He was shocked. He said his name was Joe, and his wife was on a business trip in Atlanta when the EMP hit. He was around my age. Turns out we went to the same high school, but I didn't remember him. He walks over, asks me to sit down. I pick up my AR, put the grenade away, and take Joe up on his offer. Joe starts asking questions about what's going on in the rest of the country. I tell him about the Russian invasion and the retaliatory strikes against both Russia and North Korea. He smiles that we're putting up a fight. I told him about the pilot who ejected and came down on my street. I fill him in on my two neighbors, who both had perished, the multiple group of marauders I'd encountered, and what had happened to Alicia's family just a few streets away days ago. Joe was shaken and shocked at what this world had become so quickly. He was ex-Army, just got out about 2 years ago. He worked now as a plant manager for a manufacturing company the next town over. He was new to the neighborhood, having just moved here 2 months ago. His wife had left the morning of the EMP. Joe knew there was a chance her plane fell helplessly from the sky that day. It was about 12 p.m. when we heard some noise coming from the street. We both stood up. I told him I had his back, and we made our way through the kitchen to the living room to take a look outside. We seen two men in fatigues rummaging through dead vehicles and the wreckage site of the Russian jet. Joe had moved the cars to form a barricade blocking off his house from the street to prevent thugs, FEMA, or anyone else from staging in front of his house, now making it a hard target. We walk back through the kitchen, and I look down towards my rifle, and he nods. I grab my gear, and we quietly walk out through the backyard to get a better look at these guys. The camo pattern was unusual. I wasn't familiar with it, but Joe was. He said they were government contractors, like Blackwater. We take position 2 doors down behind a vacant house garage. Joe calls out to them asking what they want. They took cover behind the vehicles. One of them calls out that they're with the government and are here to render aid and assistance. Skeptical, we ask them to come out, and we tell them that we're not hostile. After a couple minutes, they slowly emerged, with rifles down but ready. Rifles in tow, we emerged as well. They slowly approached up the driveway, armor-clad and heavily armed. The older soldier waved and smiled, saying they're peacekeepers, showed us their government ID cards. They were part of a bigger unit surveying the area for hostiles stationed at the local high school. They tell us Russian troops have been spotted within 10 miles and that we ought to prepare ourselves for ground war. They asked Joe and I if we had seen the pilot who ejected before the fighter jet crashed. I told him he's dead. I engaged with him hours ago, and I burned the body out in the middle of the street. Shocked by my answer, they asked if I'm ex-military or law enforcement. I replied, "Nah, I'm a cable guy." I think they thought I was bullshitting them until I showed them the charred remains. They told us millions have died across the country. D.C. had been flattened, and New York City had been burning for weeks due to rioting, and that every major city was a war zone with foreign troops from Russia, China, and a half-dozen other hostile countries. Government officials were fighting for power, and coups were happening daily. It had gotten bad, real bad. They said they needed our help if troops got closer. That they weren't here to harm Americans. They had vehicles, but not many. Older deuce and a halfs and jeeps older than me. Communications were still spotty, but they had working radios. They assured us they weren't the bad guys, and that if we needed help, to stop by the high school, unarmed. They had medical staff and limited medications. They headed out, and Joe and I just sat there for a minute in silence. Joe asked me if my family was okay. I told him yes. He said we need to work together because when the Russian troops do come a-marching, that allies would be more valuable than food. Joe was set on food. He prepared for this. He said he was a Mormon, and self-sufficiency was one of their tenets. I could tell he was down about his wife, but he was trying to stay positive. If her plane had landed, and with friendlies on the ground, maybe, just maybe, she was in some sort of refugee camp and okay. That gave me a little hope for my own family and friends. The soldiers seemed legit and gave me hope that maybe we'd survive this after all. All hell had broken loose, but there was still hope, at least some. I asked Joe if he wanted to head back to my house to discuss a strategy to defend our neighborhood. He nodded in agreement. Not far from the house, we walked into my backyard, sat down on my deck. My wife suspiciously walked out, stared at us, asking who Joe was. I introduced them and told her what had happened. She sat down, put her head in her hands, asking if everything would be okay. I put my arm around her and assured her that we'd make it through this and everything would be okay. Shit, I think I even convinced myself. Joe started telling me about his second tour in Afghanistan and how some of the urban tactics they used would be beneficial to us. He said we needed to fortify the houses near us to use as decoys and to draw as little attention to our houses as possible. He approved of my preps and how the house was fortified and was impressed with my perimeter defenses. He gave some tips and some suggestions, but the main topic was still foreign troops near our area. The sun was going down. Joe said he was heading back home, and that he was on channel 22 on his radio, and he'd radio ahead before he came back tomorrow. My concern was the 7 marauders who killed Alicia's family. Sooner rather than later, they needed to be dealt with. Joe agreed and said, tomorrow, we're not hunting deer. We're hunting assholes.